at the Symposium on Contemporary Issues in Legal Research, hosted by the Student Research Network in the School of Law at Queen's University Belfast. My name is Nathaniel McGrory. I'm a first-year PhD student here at Queen's, and I'm now just going to give a brief overview of today's proceedings, and I'll also be chairing the first panel of today. We decided to put this symposium together in order to give PhD students and early career researchers the opportunity to present their work this year, as many conferences have been cancelled and postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, we wanted to create a space where researchers could get some friendly feedback and where they could see possible opportunities for collaboration. We're joined here today by an international cohort of legal researchers who will be making presentations throughout the day. As you'll be aware from reviewing the programme, there are 4 panels and a keynote address. From 9:30 to 10:45, we have the panel on technology and innovation. From 11:15 to 12:30, we have the panel on legal issues arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. From 1:30 to 2:45, there's the panel on climate change. From 3 to 4:15, we have the panel on addressing inequalities. From 4:30 to 5:30, then we have the keynote address from Dr. Rona McQuigg on domestic violence, international human rights law, and the COVID-19 pandemic. The panels today will be structured as follows. The chair in each panel will introduce each panelist, who will then have 10 minutes to make their presentation. We ask the panelists keep to their allotted time as best as possible, and when there's 1 minute remaining, the chair will turn on their video and microphone to alert the panelist that they have 1 minute remaining. After all the presentations have been delivered, some feedback will be provided by the discussant in each session, and finally then there will be a Q&A. Before we begin, I just want to quickly run through a couple of house rules. Firstly, we ask that you turn off your camera and mute your microphone to ensure that the sessions run smoothly. If there are any questions, we ask that they're placed in the chat box, and the chair will present them to the panelists during the Q&A session. And if you're tweeting about the event, we ask that you please use the hashtag SRNSimp20 as seen on the slide earlier. Now, without any further ado, I could kick off the first panel of the day on the theme of technology and innovation. Firstly, I'd like to thank our discussant for this session, Mr. Iain Nash, for kindly agreeing to join us today and provide feedback for our panelists. Mr. Nash is currently undertaking a PhD in law and cybersecurity, with a particular interest in how to govern the development and code and apportion liability in the event of foreseeable cybersecurity failures. Mr. Nash has worked with cybersecurity and software firms in the UK, Israel, and the US, and we're very grateful that he's able to attend today. Our first panelist of the day is Ms. Arleta Goreca, a PhD candidate from the University of Strathclyde, who will be delivering a presentation on her paper entitled Friends or Foes, Discussing Competition Law, Big Data and Privacy Concerns. And now I'll hand over to you, Arleta, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and thank you for inviting me to join the presentation. Allow me to just share quickly my screen with you so you can see my presentation. So I'm going to try to be very smooth and very quick with everything what I wanted to say forward, because the topic is very large, and of course, like, you have to be very specific what you want to mention. So today we're going to just mention briefly about the competition law, big data and privacy concerns as being either friends or enemies. Speaking about the background, very quickly, now we do live in a very digital life. I mean, especially with the COVID pandemic, we moved our normal lives to digitalization. And recently I've came across a very interesting point that we do live in post-industrial informational capitalism, which I believe is true, because everything is based online and we overshare our data. So in fact, the digitalization also introduced a variety of unknown features, especially for competition law, and competition law authorities are actually demonstrating that they are quite slow to react on those issues. So the question for today is really, what role does privacy have in competition law? So when I was actually researching for my thesis, and this is how I created this paper, I analyzed the debate through 3 angles, 3 main goals of competition law, which are consumer welfare, efficiencies, and protection of competition structures. So beginning with the consumer welfare, the the starting point is that any personal protection breaches which is accumulated from big data / big analysis debate might demonstrate that the protection of competition law and competition law structures might lack any methodological ability to analyze such contents. So this is actually the reason why I've structured those debate into three aspects. So when we try to link the consumer welfare to the antitrust regime, we do get problems, especially that there's problems with assessing the competition value of privacy concerns. And sincerely, one of those problems is that when we do look at the consumer welfare, we do get some sort of a price-centric method. So since privacy in itself is not a price-centric feature of any debate, this is when one of the problems comes forward. So the digital market usually provides free for consumer services, which are very highly innovative. And in this respect, the quality comes forward as a very interesting parameter and very important parameter. So when we do look at the example of the Facebook case, and I call it Facebook case because this is one of the cases from Germany, and this one I actually devoted quite a lot of time, was the one from 2019 from Bundeskartellamt. We were given a we're given a picture that any distortion of privacy was seen as harming consumer welfare, despite the lack of any price effect. So privacy protection and privacy breaches might in itself enforce a range of very difficult to qualify and features for consumer welfare. So this is only one of the elements. The other element is that we do get an issue with private gatekeepers, which are, I call them private gatekeepers, but they are data gatekeepers, in the sense that those are the company who accumulate enormous quantities of big data. And their power might be seen as being restrained by GDPR in the sense that they do collect our data and we do give a consent. And in this respect, there are two fundamental issues put forward. So first of all, there's a problem, in my opinion, with the right of data portability, which introduced by the GDPR is quite a user-centric doctrine. Nevertheless, it's offering only short-term approach, because for us consumers, the data means nothing as a single unit. But then for those big platforms, the data is a key aspect for them to get money from, and also to innovate and create the knowledge. But also there's a problem with a consent, and the notice and consent scenario is just showing that people are likely to just agree to those aspects without actually reading any terms and conditions. Moving forward, we do have some problems with efficiencies, and efficiencies are very entwined with the protection welfare promotion. But in the same time, the digital platforms will, of course, depend on valorization of data and a high degree of processing, with data acquisition, of course, being the cornerstone of every debate. Nevertheless, the European Commission rarely looked at the efficiencies in itself. However, we can get some sort of deduction from our previous cases. So one of the cases is, for instance, the case when the Microsoft was tying the Windows Media Player to the operating system. So the line of argument of Microsoft was that it was easier for them to actually introduce those programs, just because user was already given a program which you can access, watch a film or listen to music. Nevertheless, the Commission disagreed with this aspect, because the efficiency element was just irrelevant in this debate, and the software cost was just low, and user could have just easily replicate the program without any issues. And again, applying it to the debate which we do have at the moment in the Facebook case from 2019, again, there was still a vague discussion on efficiency assessment. Potentially, there was some sort of a lens of competition law applicable that efficiency could have been distorted. Nevertheless, there aren't any EU law cases in this respect, and the case was decided on German law in itself. So we do have some sort of two-sided debate going forward if we do need this sort of debate and to take it into consideration. And lastly, the protection of the competition structure. So the key point is that the European Commission still showed some sort of a pragmatic interpretation of competition legal order, and protection of competition structure is seen as one of the key issues. And of course, the competition structure protection will be then seen as derived from the EU treaties as key to establish a single market. When we do look at the prism of digital economy, the protection of competition structure might be limited, and a further normative standard could be necessary to establish that undertaking's conduct is violating the competition law. Nevertheless, this is where the debate about allowing the non-economic goals into competition law comes forward. And in this respect, there's one of the interesting paper put by Edrachi, who actually compared the competition law to and all the social deliberation to the sponge and membrane analogy, which allowed only, with the, of course, sponge being the core of the competition law and allowing only the certain necessary aspects through in and out. So although we do need some sort of guidance put forward, there's still a huge debate going forward, like how to access it. So I'm trying to propose that the instrumentalisation of competition law is necessary to allow us to tackle all the problems imposed by the digital economy and any potential breaches of data protection. So we do have some sort of two policies available. So target industrial policies and competitiveness policies. And so far, the debate is really about like whether the competition law enforcement should include any broader social deliberation. And to a certain extent, it is correct, because we do have a debate about sustainability, and again, the digital era is still progressing rapidly, and we cannot catch up with everything that's happening. So when we do look at the digital economy competitive angle, we do get a picture of winner takes all approach. So there are various instances to establish an network effect or two-sided markets due to the speedy pace of innovation and high investment. And we can see it because when we do use of Facebook or different platforms, we see that they rapidly change and introduce various new products. So when we do look at the growing reliance of technological phenomenon of big data, there is an overarching concern that the present efficiencies of law should be reflected and should ensure that the social standard is to protect the privacy, but also to protect the competition and consumer welfare in itself. So recently there was a Franco-German manifesto imposed, and this is where the debate was actually sparked. Since the debate was actually to introduce a industrial policy toolkit for the 21st century, which tried to allow and gave us some sort of ideas how we can tackle all the digital aspects. So, for instance, one of the recommendation was just to take a greater consideration of the state control and framework of measures, and also it was necessary to update any measure guidelines, as well as allow to consider the competition on a more global level. Also, the manifesto recommended to consider whether there is a right to appeal of the council, and which will allow to override any decisions of the commission. Yet, what the debate really look forward, that there's a crucial concern that the council decision would need to encompass a greater nature of the political nature. So this is where another angle was introduced, whether we do need a politicization of competition law in itself. So yet the previous enforcement showed that the industrial policy is likely to be very a successful means, especially when we do look at the debate considering the telecommunication back in the beginning of the 21st century in the 1990s. Of course, there was introduced by a large monopolist and breaching of competition law, and industrial policy allowed to actually capture the market. And technically speaking, when we do look at the debate and we do look at the competition in a post-industrial informational capitalism era, we see that there's a lack of integration for any broader concerns, and we cannot we cannot really apprehend the new value of the new generalization processes in the competition law. So in fact, even though the digital economy is characterized by complexity, as we do get a form of very economic links, but also we do get an angle of societal relationship with various agents. And this is where the privacy can come through. So also what is necessary that when we do look at the debate forward, we can get that the debate will be extinguished in not three potential aspects. So one of the aspects is really about the political debate. So at one hand, we do know that industrial policy and competition law, even if they are agreed to be mutually different, they interlink each other and they're very used together as a means to ensure that the single market can work efficiency. Nevertheless, this is where the Article 2 of the Treaty of European Union says that the EU goal is to safeguard the democratic processes of the Union. So this is where the topic is very delicate, because we need to ensure whether the industrial policy can in fact be a means to tackle any digital competition concerns. There is also about the debate about the economic sphere, and it's particularly important to consider any potential promotion of any structural adjustments. And in my point of view, this is where when we actually need to discuss whether what is the value of privacy, how to define the privacy for the means of competition law, and whether we should look at the privacy breaches as a means to impact the consumer welfare, or whether the debate should be more looked at the big data / big analysis debate, where the knowledge is more likely to, the knowledge and the conduct of the undertaking is more likely to harm the consumers and the competition law, and then privacy should be just looked at the data protection lawyers as a byproduct of this relationship. And lastly, we need to make sure that we can still maintain the competitiveness of the union. So the debate demonstrates that the debate, of course, those two policies are opposing. There are various of the researchers that demonstrate that mutually those two can be quite interlinked together. So everything still should be maintained to ensure that the internal market is the core idea of the European Union. And in this respect, the protection of the competitiveness of the market isn't necessarily mean to ensure that we can get the benefits of the single market and make sure that the competition functions well. So thank you very much for your attention. This will conclude my presentation.
That's great, Arletta. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For that very insightful presentation. Okay, so our second panelist for today is Dr. Maria Stefania Cataletta, an associate researcher at the University Côte d'Azur, who will be delivering a presentation on her paper entitled The Protection of Personal Data in the Digital Era, the Role of GDPR. And now I'll hand it over to you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. Well, every second, billions of internet users give web giants huge amounts of personal data transmitted all over social networks, equating to an annual market value of $1 trillion. According to the McCarthy law, the value of a network grows exponentially in relation to the number of users. The problem that arises concerns the protection of this patrimony of data, mainly personal data, because this data is one of the sectors most involved on a daily basis by the arrival of artificial intelligence systems. In the digital world, the right to privacy is protected by international treaties such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 12, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 17, in addition to regional instruments such as the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, Article 7. Despite the legal protection, the right to our privacy is constantly undetermined by the use of the internet, which constantly is fed more information. Despite the legal protection, the right to our privacy is constantly undetermined by the use of the internet, which constantly feeds more and more information. This can be provided with our consent, but also fraudulently extracted and used by criminal networks to extort us for money, by governments to carry out mass checks, or through more mundane ways, such as by companies to model their advertisement according to our personal profile. While digital communication has, on the one hand, revolutionized the world of work and interpersonal relationships, it has, on the other hand, made our privacy more fragile, making it more permeable to violations. At European level, limits to the intrusiveness of digital evolution on citizen rights to privacy were posed by the European Union General Data Protection Regulation. The regulation reduces the freedom of companies in their management of data. However, according to the principles and provision of the GDPR, there are some criticisms concerning personal data. First, the problem of the purpose of the technology is present, seeing as in Europe, artificial intelligence functions can only be carried out for specific purposes. With respect to this aspect, it is necessary to warn against the dangers posed by artificial intelligence, which in the early stages of its operation processes the data predetermined for determined purposes, but that in the field of machine learning, its ability to adapt and consequently change its behaviors, it could begin to process those same data for purposes other than those set out in advance. All this cannot escape the control of the data subject and data controller. Another difficult aspect is that of the processing of multiple information by AI systems. Oddly enough, it is not uncommon for such systems to also obtain sensitive personal data, such as health or sex life attitudes, from the processing of non-personal data. There are some problems related to AI and data protection that, if remain unaddressed, according to the respect of ethical and normative canons determined by the GDPR and other sources, can turn into unfair advantageous opportunity for the operator. Regarding the GDPR, recital number 75 speaks to the risks, to the rights and freedoms of physical persons that may result from the processing of personal data at the discretion of out-of-control AI systems or in the wrong hands, and therefore liable to cause physical, material, or immaterial damage. In particular, the recital warns against data processing which may involve discrimination, theft or misuse of identity, financial loss, damage to reputation, loss of confidentiality of personal data protected by professional secrecy, unauthorized decryption of pseudonymization, or any other significant economic or social damage. It also provides for where data subjects risk being deprived of their rights and freedoms or prevented from exercising control over personal data related to them, or where personal data would like be processed to reveal racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, trade union membership, genetic data, health data, or data relating to sex life or criminal conviction and crimes, or related security measures. There are cases in which the data processing leads to the assessment on personal aspects, in particular by analyzing or forecasting aspects relating to professional performance, economic situation, health, preferences, or personal interest, reliability or behavior, location or travel, in order to create or use personal profiles. In the end, there are cases in which data are processed on vulnerable physical persons, such as children, or data processing involving a large amount of personal data and data subject. In Recital 76 of the GDPR, it is stated that the probability and the severity of the risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subjects should be determined with regard to the nature, the scope, the context of the processing. The risk should be considered on the basis of an objective assessment where it is to be established if the data processing operation involves a risk of a high risk. In Recital 77, encouragement is given to adopt a code of conduct, approved certification, guidelines provided by the Committee of Informatics and Liberties, or guidance given by a data protection officer. It is clear that while in the past the aim was to protect the private citizen from state interference and abuse of power, protection against the misuse of personal information at the present call into question the role of individuals who often offer their own personal data voluntarily to private companies in exchange for advantages. Internet users, in fact, make possible willingly or otherwise the reconstruction of their own individual profile through cookies, geotracking, and consent to the sale, or sometimes fraudulent acquisition of their own data. Scholars have pointed out that human rights lose their meaning in the case privacy, where their use can be traded like any other commodity in exchange for money or other advantages. The free sale of privacy ends up allowing totalitarian control by those who manage this information to learn about, to pilot, and to guide through statistical analysis the personal choices of the same users in exchange for utility. This information given to the public web record on the precondition of democratic participation in online life. In this way, the logic underlying human rights will be reversed, as they will be invoked to protect individual choices as an expression of freedom, ending, however, to be manipulated by power centers, the second in which these companies were to acquire the domain over these personal informations. The great power of the individual now contrasts itself against that of the ever-diminishing authority of the state, destined to succumb to the free will of the individual over his own control of his own rights. Yet these rights, unfortunately, are now being given to centers of political and economic power, that is the creator of AI, who are able to manipulate them in order to redirection individual choices. There is no longer the big brother of the state that watches us, but there is an individual increasingly eager to be supervised. In the digital era, the GDPR represents a limit to the interference of AI to our rights to privacy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Maria. That's great. Unfortunately, our final panelist today hasn't been able to attend the session. So now I would like to take the opportunity to invite Iain to provide his feedback and thoughts on the presentations made by the panelists here today. Whenever you're ready, Iain.
Thanks so much, guys. You just caught me in the process. I thought I'd a few more minutes to get my notes together and a few arguments drawn out. So this is very much on the hoof. But firstly, I want to thank both speakers. The papers, although quite different, they're actually touching on two of the kind of same topics, and this is really based on privacy as a more general topic, and then the impact of artificial intelligence on this and how this is actually wrapped up. I have a few questions for each of the speakers, which I'll get to in a second. But one thing which is interesting that I find is that when the speakers are talking about it, they're talking about privacy, they're talking about this as a challenge which we're facing. It would be interesting to see what their view is, how we've solved similar large problems. Obviously not the same, because kind of privacy and data are new, but we have faced other large-scale problems where people's rights have been infringed in the EU, outside of the EU, and on a global basis. And it would be interesting to get their views on how we've solved this in the past, and if they think those approaches are relevant here, or do we have to strike in something new. Personally, I like to equate this to smoking. I think, you know, kind of back in the 60s and like 50s, it was plugged to something which is great, and in the same time, people, you know, kind of scientists and small, very small fringe people were saying this is dangerous, this is bad, this is unhealthy, this will cause you harm. But the harm was not visualized by the people who were smoking. It was cool, it was exciting, and it's a little bit how we use large data platforms today. I mean, it's the case where you get your dopamine hit, you can share your information, and there is no harm in the view of most people. But privacy now is a little bit later than that. It's the case where now people think maybe there is a little bit harm here. I'm going to listen a little bit to the people. I'm going to keep smoking. I'm going to keep using this. I'm not going to impugn on my my social media activity. And AI, I think, is earlier. It's still something wonderful, exciting, but the consequences of it to the general public haven't really wrapped up yet. So I would be interested to hear what the panelists' take on is that, and how they think how we've solved other problems in the past can be applied today, and what they think the direction of that will be. Some particular questions. First for Arletta, and I'm really hoping I can read my horrible writing here. I was really taken by, it was almost a throwaway line that actually you said at the start, where people are still oversharing our data, and I would fully agree with this. But what is that problem? Is that a problem of education of people? Is it a problem that they don't understand what they're doing? Or is it the case where people know that what they're doing is fundamentally wrong or potentially wrong, but that they don't care? And therefore, is this a competition problem, a privacy problem, or an educational problem? I don't think it can be put into a single bucket, but I'd be very interested to hear what you think about that. You then went to data portability, which is interesting and completely unexpected. I have not heard that too much, that people think there's a problem in data portability. And I'm thinking, kind of, do I want my insurance companies, my health insurance companies, my driver insurance companies, my electricity usage in my services that I use? And yes, there's a switching problem because I need to move from one account to the other. But I would really like, you know, like my data to stay there. I don't want an impermeable record of my actions following me around from company to company. So I was really interested to hear that. That is kind of a new one for me. You talked then on efficiency. And actually, sorry, just to go back a point, because I've written this out of sequence. I think you're right that price is a problem, because there is no kind of. I mean, it's based on standard economic models. You make a decision, and that's usually reflected in price, and therefore the actions that you do will be fundamentally driven by price. When the price is gone, we then move to a case where you're making a kind of like, basically, I would call it a positive action. I'm going to actively switch my search engine from Google to something else because that's what I want to do. That is a strong statement of intent. And it's a positive action versus a passive action, which is click, 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 and I'm set up. And that's, I think you've actually landed on that. And I would love to see, or I would love to hear, is that where you think price is going to be replaced with? Is it the actual positive actions taken by people, or are we getting a little bit wrapped up in the default? But kind of one thing which I think, again, you touched on, I didn't hear out, but on in the competition structure, is where and what do you want to see with regard to the walled gardens problem? Is it that you want is it that you're happy with the current situation where we have a small number of large walled gardens and it's pay to play inside of that? Is it that you'd prefer to see a larger number of smaller walled gardens with a bit more interoperability in between that? Or, and this is something I've heard from other in other papers on this, and wasn't brought up here, but I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Is it that you want to see some neutral party? I've heard, which would worry me, for example, the EU should be managing the digital infrastructure, and the companies then should be just kind of inside of that and existing inside of that. Kind of like Maria, again, a very interesting paper, and I think the kind of GDPR is a very, well, it's where the actual forefront is. I don't know if it's where it's going to remain, but it links up very well with our kind of Lettuce paper, because again, you have companies which are too large and they're able to get access to this data, this very granular information, and really the only way they're able to do that is because, as I mentioned earlier, people are giving it to them. We have this oversharing problem, and again, I'd just love to get your answer on that. That is this an educational problem? Is this a competition problem? And where does the balance on that lie? You talk a lot on AI, and I think this is a really interesting week for it. And I'm conscious that this paper was probably written a little bit before the advances in DeepMind. It's interesting, or I find it interesting, that probably the biggest advance in genuine artificial intelligence has come out of Europe, out of Oxford, with the protein folding of DeepMind. And that is a system which didn't use a single piece of personal data. That model itself, its previous its like previous win was being able to teach itself Go with, again, out using a single piece of personal data, without using a single piece of past information. It was taught the rules, and it then built its strategy, and it became the best Go player in the world. And I find that interesting, because we're starting to see potentially where AI can actually help, because you can throw data at AI, which has been done. And if we even look at things, there's a scandal of Cambridge Analytica, which was indirectly referenced in, I think, both papers. But if we look at what they did, it wasn't really AI. It was just ordinary mathematical or stats processes. There was very little genuine artificial intelligence. That was just, we get a big data set, we're going to process it, and see what comes out of the results. And I can't think of a single large win where like AI has taken large amounts of very granular data and done something with it. So I'd love to see, do actually you see this as potentially a turning point where we're going to start using AI properly? We're going to start potentially using AI where it can win in more technical, non-personal data, in just solving complex mathematical issues, which is what it's very good at, as opposed to trying to throw the kitchen sink at it with personal data. And then on that point, we need to figure out where those boundaries are. We need to incorrectly use tech, incorrectly use practices to find out what they can do and what they can't do. And how do you think that boundary can be moved? How if you were advising the CTOs of companies, how would you think they say, right, this is what we can try, how are we going to manage these trials, how are we going to establish where tech can work and where it can't work? And I think that's really, for me, like what I took from your paper is, we have these rules, we have really used AI badly, but we've also shown recently that we can use it well. And how do we manage that process? And I had another point, and I genuinely can't read a single word of it because I was scribbling it very quickly there at the end. But I'm hoping there's enough couple of questions there for the panelists to go with. I'm also hoping I was off mute.
Thank you very much for your question. Can I start, since I was the first person to proceed, please?
Yeah, go ahead, Arletta. Yeah.
Right, thank you. So there are only a couple of things I want to mention. So I do agree with the oversharing data aspect. So my take is that people just disregard actually reading the terms and conditions. They're quite lengthy. People don't understand what they are about. And in fact, when I do speak with my friends, many of them haven't even touched upon the terms of condition. They just joined the platform because either someone from the family was there, it was easier for people to actually get together, or for instance, they use a particular platform because of the certain advantages given by them, like for instance, insurance comparison websites. So people do tend to agree to such a things if they get some sort of benefits. So, and again, my take is that those platforms are just shown to face features. So on the one side, we can get a nice platform with a very interesting innovation features for us, but then secondly, we do get some sort of a danger presentable, and it can be either a competition or danger, because then of course those platforms grow big and they can actually change the terms and conditions very quickly, and of course exploit the consumers and then harm the market. But then equally, we do get some sort of positive externalities as a customers as well. I'm not saying that the being big is bad. It's just harming the market is bad. So even the competition law emphasizes that the monopolist should, if you're a monopolist, it's fine. You just can't abuse your extreme power on the market. So, for instance, when we do look at the case from 2019, there's again, but this Cardella case about the Facebook. The main issue was that people were okay with sharing the information on Facebook. Nevertheless, no one really knew that their data is being also captured while using third-party websites who adhered to the Facebook business tool, I think. So this is where the problem came in forms. Of course, then once the company is able to, the one that actually is using the Facebook business tool is sharing the data with Facebook, Facebook can then display the advertisement which are allowed to shape our minds without actually us knowing upon this. Yeah, the prices are quite an important element, because now is a huge debate not only about the privacy in itself, but there's also a call for the sustainability. So we do get to non-priced, non-able to be defined by priced features, and we don't know really how to apprehend it, because competition law is very economized. We need to see the price, we need to see the actual harm as being displayed to us, and now we actually wander around very non-economical features which we don't even know how to define for the purposes of competition law. So this is why I do believe that a potential instrumentalization is almost an inevitable part, especially that I did look at what happened before, and we did have issue with telecommunication markets where network effects were built up, and we did get some sort of cases, for instance, from Telekomunikacja Polska, from a Polish telecommunication company who is still a monopolist in Poland, and they harmed the market extendedly. So we do need some sort of additional rules to allow us to navigate through those unprecedented times and sufficiently catch up with all the changes that are happening in the market. You mentioned the data portability for me. So yeah, I actually came across this point quite recently, and I do believe that there's a problem which actually can be linked with the big data, big analysis comparison when we do talk about the privacy concerns. So I picture it in this way, that our data, when we use Facebook, is fine, because we probably know that we agree to sharing the content, which is fine. Nevertheless, Facebook, because we use the Facebook, then equally our data is also captured by third parties, and due to the Facebook business tool. Then it's okay, because like we kind of know what's happened, but for them it's a massive part, because they get our data, they can revenue for the data, they can analyze the data and arrive with the particular piece of knowledge which would be necessary for the purposes of innovation. However, if we do agree to actually leave this platform and we want to take away our data, it means nothing for us, because first of all, we probably didn't know that we actually overshared that many information, but then equally they managed to already revenue from this piece of information, and also they are used to get a particular set of innovation, and for us it means nothing, and for them it can mean a lot. So so this is why I do believe that actually the data portability is a very short-term right, which actually appears to be user-centric, but could actually get a way to introduce a further power for the digital gatekeepers. And the digital gatekeepers are a very interesting terms now for the analysis of the new competition law tool, which we probably will get sometime soon in the December. And also, I do believe that, of course, there's another issue, because we don't get a competition. Well, the market in the European Union doesn't have any big data companies, because we use Facebook, Apple, Amazon, or Google, which come from America. But the problem is that there's also some sort of a national taxation issue. So many of these issues will try to be actually looked by the Commission as a very delicate subject, because the national taxation might be seen as a one-stop shop in the terms of a setting of a race to the bottom. And one of those examples could be actually seen by Ireland and Apple, because Ireland and Apple had an issue about taxation, and they actually managed to cancel about like 2 million, I think, pounds of euros or of the taxation for them. So I hope that those answers your question, Iain, and thank you very much for asking them to me.
Great, Arletta, thank you. And Maria, do you have any thoughts or anything you want to say yourself? I think you're on mute there, Maria, sorry.
Okay.
Yep, perfect.
Yes, I would like to underline the risks connected to the use of artificial intelligence on our private life, because online mass checks, data theft, phishing, malware are all risks to our digital security rights. And first of all, there is the right to privacy. The right of privacy, because when we transmit information about our movements or habits through a mobile phone, for example, our right to privacy is called into question. Making a purchase, a reservation, or expressing a like are all action that can provide more or less consciously information about ourselves. Every time we put information on the net, in this moment, these little segments of our lives are brought together to paint a picture of who we are, what our tastes or beliefs, our movements are, and so on. And in Europe, the European Union General Data Protection Regulation represents a limit to the break-in of artificial intelligence in our privacy. But as I thought, there are some criticism. One of those is concern the legal basis in processing data. In addition to pre-established purposes, processing can only take place if there are adequate legal bases that make that processing lawful. So when data processing does not conform to the defined legal basis expressed in the contractual obligation between the data subject and the data controller, which happens when the AI system escapes proper human or algorithmic oversight, it is difficult to find an additional legal basis. In this sense, it is important to underline Rule 22 of the GDPR, which establishes the need for a human subject behind the automated processes in order to protect the data subject's rights and freedoms and legitimate interest. Last thing I would like to underline that Europeans have the most protective legislation in the world for consumers' protection and privacy, thanks to the GDPR. But on the other hand, we are becoming a digital colony of the American Chinese AI industries. Because the ongoing legislation battle is over the proper level of privacy and technological freedom, and the European error would be to focus only on consumer protection, contrary to what the United States and China do, which protect large digital industries. This is my concern, that it's connected to the role of democracy that protects a lot the private sphere, but democracy is an imperfect system, and nobody until now has found a better system, even if it is an imperfect system. So this was Winston Churchill. I agree with him.
Great, Maria, thank you. Just to ask quickly, Iain, if you have anything else that you'd like to add in light of the responses given by the panelists before we head over to the Q&A session.
No, that's great information back from both panelists. I guess just because I'm conscious there's still quite a few minutes left, so I kind of figure, like, why not? It would be interesting to see, based on the conversations and based on the answers that have been given by the panelists there, to move to a slightly different topic, which would be end-to-end encryption, to allow for reasonably private conversations between people, which is something where the tech companies are moving to. But this seems to be fiercely objected to by entities of both in the individual member states and in the European Union itself, and obviously the states. The actual, like, kind of USA is against this as well. It had encryption as an arms control restriction for many years. So do you think, as we go into this battle for privacy, that there should be a fundamental right for somebody to be able to talk to someone else or for a group in a completely kind of snoopable way, shall we say? And that would be a question for both panelists.
Thanks, Iain. Arletta, if you'd like to go first and answer that.
Oh, thank you very much. I do believe that WhatsApp is using this sort of communication, so we actually can just apparently not track, but I do believe that things like that might become a reality, that there will be some sort of encryption and no one will actually be able to spy on us if we do chat. Nevertheless, again, this is quite a very delicate subject. I mean, because we might be offered something, but then we might get not actually an evidence that things like that is happening. Like, for instance, with Uber, I think so the Uber is having some sort of a algorithm which is called a God view. So even if we were promised that we are not going to be tracked where we are more likely to be targeted with various discounts or various information when they actually know where we are, and they apparently track us without actually us being notified about this. These are just some sort of ideas that we get through some evidences and some whistleblowers, but I don't think that I do believe that encryption is necessary, but I don't believe that it will be achievable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arletta. And Maria, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, there is a risk for our human rights, of course. Human rights that are protected by international treaties. So, like the right to privacy, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, there is a risk. A state should be protect this potential risk to our human rights.
Thank you, Maria. And now just going to open the floor to the Q&A session. I think we do have one question that was put into the chat box. Let me just get it here. And that was from Andreas. The question is on the topic of GDPR. Having in mind that in France there is a law proposal prohibiting photographs of the police, it seems to me that the GDPR provides a blind and general protection of personal data, without distinguishing between the government/police, a corporation, a private individual, or a protester. Is the status of GDPR like that? And if yes, should it be like that? And if Maria, if you'd like to go first on that, if you have any thoughts.
I don't know the legislation in France, to be honest. I think there is the right to expression, the freedom of expression is strictly linked to the right to privacy. So when when online we manifest an opinion, we express our point of view. So they are strictly linked, and the inside of artificial intelligence of algorithms can affect our right to freedom of expression.
Thanks, Maria. And Arletta, if you have any thoughts.
No, okay, I agree with everything what Maria said, so thank you very much for asking me.
Yeah, perfect. So another question here. What do either of you think about the walled garden analogy put forth by Iain, such as Amazon, Facebook, etc.? Do you think that these exist? And should there be optimal size, or should someone neutral run them?
I mean, this is a difficult question for me from a competition law perspective, because we do have an idea that, okay, these are the monopolists, so we should be cautious and watch them. Nevertheless, being big is not bad in itself. It's just harming the each piece of market. This is where actually we should be looking at. So like when we do talk about these companies, I don't necessarily agree that they should be split into small neutral companies to maintain that they're run by someone neutral. I just believe that we should actually be able to monitor what they're doing quite narrower and know actually what they're doing with our data and what they do with the sort of information they get from this data. So should be more transparency is needed and more clearer rules are needed. But again, this is a topic for a very large debate, and there will be conflicting counter arguments. So I don't think that there is a clear answer to this question. So thanks so much. I hope this gave an answer.
Maria, anything you'd like to add there?
I agree with Adita. I agree with her.
Perfect, thanks. One interesting aspect that was brought up there, highlighted also by Iain and the panelists whenever they were giving their presentations, was the idea of oversharing, particularly whether or not that is a competition issue, a privacy issue, or an education issue. So taking the education aspect, is there anything in particular you think that could be useful, or how we should approach the problem of teaching people about oversharing their data? Maria, if you'd like to go first on that.
Can you please repeat the question?
So very basically the question is there anything that you think, or any way that we can teach people about the dangers of oversharing?
Yes, of course, this could be, this should be necessary, of course. This is the duty for an educator. This is very important that people know exactly what is the situation, which are the risks, which are the proper, eventually the proper involved.
Thanks, Maria. And Arletta?
Yeah, I do agree with Maria. We need to get some sort of education being present. In fact, look at the terms and introducing actually joining a platform or using such a platform will mean for each individual. So education is necessary, especially now in the age when we do rely on those means for communication, working, and doing really everything, especially in the times of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there's any other questions there, feel free to pop them in the chat box. Just on the topic of oversharing there, one interesting thought that came to my head was the app or the browser add-on called Disconnect. I don't know if either of you are familiar with it. I do know that they have filed suit against Google for removing them from the App Store. Basically, it's the app that, or the browser, it shows you who is tracking you online. If either of you have any thoughts on those sort of things as something that can be used to educate people about how their data is being used or who is actually trying to use their data while they're using their apps or the surfing the web. Arletta, or if you have any thoughts there.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So there's no real question there. It's just one of my thoughts whenever I was listening to both of you guys giving your presentation and Iain giving his feedback is the app or Google browser add-on called Disconnect. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It was developed by a former Google engineer to follow and track who is trying to access your data online. So it's just putting it out there if you have any thoughts or ideas about the usefulness of an app such as that. But if you're not familiar with it, there's not really much that you can say about it.
I came across similar I heard about this one particularly, but I think when I actually researched it for the algorithm, well, in this spring, I came across the aspect that many people are actually aware of the point that we are being tracked by different companies. So one of the key issues that people are using, they delete cookies from the internet browser so they can actually get a better deals and then actually can't start as a new person online. So this is again from what my point was, that is being tricky in the sense that we might get better deals if we do delete the browser history and especially the cookies. Then equally, people should be more aware. And of course, those aspects are quite dangerous for the companies because they know that things like that exist and people want to show that we are being tracked, we are being watched. And this is the reason why they actually try to delete those. I do believe the sort of barriers to entry in this respect because, again, market is open for anyone and they just try to exploit and exclude them from actually entering the market. So I do believe that such platforms or apps are almost necessary for us. And of course, those, for instance, I think the Safari is using now the tracker who actually blocks everyone who wants to track to you. And I'm not sure to what extent it's working. However, nevertheless, we will probably get some sort of platforms like that being more freely available for the users to give them a better access to better prices and better products. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Arletta. Maria, if you have any thoughts on that?
Just a little point that it is important to let know the rule 22 of the GDPR that people know this rule, which established the need for a human subject beyond automated processes. In this sense, the process won't be completely automated. There will be the human presence, and this is important. The people must know this.
Thanks, Maria. One final question, then I know we're approaching the 10:45 end of the session here. It's just how do either of you panelists think or define think about or define artificial intelligence. So what does it really mean to you? Arletta, if you'd like to go first on that one.
So my take on artificial intelligence is that that this will be the elements of very important innovations. So again, for our computational lawyers, we do get to angles. So one angle will be Janus-based features. So one angle will be getting us to get better deals, better products. But then again, we do get an idea that we might be easily brainwashed, if I can put it this way, in the sense that we will be able to see products or platforms, and on those platforms we were using, like for instance, the Facebook or Instagram, and eventually then it will allow to shape our ideas and prone us to buy those sort of products. So this is how I picture the artificial intelligence for the digital platforms. Thank you.
Thanks, Arletta. Maria?
Yes, I would like just to say that it's important. The importance of the artificial intelligence is huge, but it's also fundamental to have an anthropocentric approach of AI, because this is the only approach capable of guaranteed dignity and autonomy of people who must always be given the power to supervise machines.
Great, Maria, thank you. And just as we wrap up here now, we're approaching the 10:45. I just want to thank both of you again for your participation and contributions today, and also thank Iain for giving up his time to take part and give some feedback. So I think we'll call it a day there, then take a break now from 10:40 to 11:15. 11:15 then is the beginning of the next session, which is the panel on legal issues arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks, everybody.